When a dying mercenary accepts a forbidden alien ritual to save his life, he becomes humanity's first hybrid, part human, part ancient alien royalty. His transformation awakens 87,000 god ships that have slept for millennia, making him the most powerful military commander in the galaxy. But power comes at a devastating cost. Every battle burns away his humanity, piece by piece. As genetic purity laws crumble and an ancient enemy stirs in the darkness between galaxies, Jake Morales must decide what he's willing to sacrifice, and whether the weapon humanity has become can save two species from extinction or doom them both. This is a story of transformation, sacrifice, and the price of godhood. A military science fiction epic about forbidden evolution, the lies civilizations tell themselves, and what it means to become something more than human, even if it costs you everything you were.
How many ships total? Death is just another enemy to outflank.
Jake Reaper Morales pressed his palm against the crystalline console, alien symbols pulsing like angry heartbeats beneath his blood-slicked fingers. The assassination attempt had come without warning. 3 plasma bolts through the Royal Shuttle's hull at coordinates that should have been secure, then chaos erupting in a cascade of molten metal and screaming alarms. Now Princess Lyra knelt beside him in the emergency medical bay, her 4 hands moving in intricate patterns that would either save his life or damn them both to execution. Each breath tasted of copper and ozone, his lungs screaming protests as her forbidden ritual carved itself into his DNA. Through the viewport, he could see Fleet Admiral Zethkar's strike fleet holding position 3,000 kilometers out, 12 heavy cruisers with weapons hot, waiting to see if their princess would commit heresy or come to her senses. The tactical part of Jake's brain, the part that had kept him alive through 17 years of mercenary contracts, calculated their odds of survival at roughly 4%.
The ritual is working. Jake, you're going to live, but you won't be human anymore. Do you understand? You'll never be fully human again.
23 standard hours ago, those same hands had been entirely human, scarred from combat, steady from years of weapons training, unremarkable except for their efficiency at killing. Now, bioluminescent veins traced geometric patterns up his forearms like living circuit boards, and his heartbeat synchronized with the ship's quantum core in ways that made the medical scanners scream impossible readings. His reflection in the medical pod's curved surface showed eyes shifting between human brown and alien gold, the irises fracturing into crystalline patterns that hurt to look at. The transformation was complete. His cellular structure had accepted Valkyrian royal genetics with an eagerness that terrified the medical AI monitoring his vitals. That was the problem. Fleet Admiral Zethkar's mandibles clicked in barely contained rage as surveillance feeds flooded his neural implants, painting his command center with holographic displays of the abomination taking place aboard the Royal Medical Vessel. 40 years commanding the High Council's forces, 4 decades of faithful service to genetic purity laws, and he'd never witnessed such sacrilege. Princess Lyra had just violated every law their civilization was built on. 5,000 cycles of careful bloodline management, of genetic isolation protocols designed to prevent exactly this scenario. But worse, far worse, she'd proven the ancient texts were right. Hybrids could command the sleeping fleet.
Sir, the dormant fleet is responding. 17 Dreadnoughts just powered their cores. Biosignatures are... Admiral, they're recognizing the hybrid as legitimate command authority. The bloodline protocol, it actually works.
Zethkar's claws scraped his command throne hard enough to leave furrows in the reinforced metal. For 3 centuries, his people had maintained peace through genetic purity laws, strict protocols preventing anyone from awakening the war fleet that had nearly destroyed them in the Great Silence. The ancient ships were too powerful, too dangerous, too tempting for those who might use them to reshape the galaxy through force. Better they sleep forever than risk another war that could extinguish entire species. Now, one desperate princess and a dying human mercenary had undone 300 years of carefully maintained balance in a single desperate ritual, he asked, though he already knew the answer, had known it since the moment the first Dreadnought's core hummed to life.
Preliminary scans show 87,000 vessels responding to his genetic signature, Admiral. Every ship in the ancient armada, they're all awakening.
87,000 Dreadnoughts, each one the size of a small moon, each one carrying weapons that could crack planets like eggs. Enough firepower to conquer or annihilate every known civilization in the galaxy 3 times over. All answering to a human mercenary who'd been bleeding out on a shuttle floor an hour ago. Jake stood slowly, feeling alien strength course through muscles that remembered being human. The sensation was intoxicating and horrifying in equal measure. Power beyond anything he'd imagined, but at a cost he was only beginning to understand. Outside the viewport, ancient vessels emerged from pocket dimensions like metal leviathans, answering an impossible summons, their obsidian hulls drinking starlight as they materialized into real space. Each dreadnought bore scars from the Great Silence. A war so catastrophic, the Velcaran had sworn never to wake their sleeping armadas again. Princess Lyra, Zethkar's hologram, materialized in the medical bay without warning, his 6 eyes blazing with barely controlled fury and something else. Was that hope?
You have created a weapon of impossible power. The question is, can your hybrid even comprehend the responsibility you've thrust upon him? Can a human mind process what it means to command the instruments of divine judgment?
Jake felt the weight of 17 dreadnoughts pressing against his consciousness, each one a distinct presence in his mind like whispered conversations in a language he'd never learned but somehow understood. They wanted orders. They wanted purpose. They wanted him to wake the others, to let 87,000 sleeping gods stretch their wings and remember what they were built to do. Death had been easy. A simple plasma bolt, a brief moment of pain, then nothing. Living with the power to wake gods? That was the real enemy now.
Admiral, I think we need to talk about the Kresh Hegemony, because these ships, they remember how to end wars.
Jake flexed his transformed hands 72 hours after the ritual, watching bioluminescent patterns pulse beneath skin that was no longer entirely human. The medical bay had become his prison and sanctuary both, a place where he could learn what he'd become without terrifying every Velcuran who saw him. Lyra had barely left his side, sleeping in a chair beside his medical pod, her royal guards maintaining nervous vigils at the door.
Your people really believe this bloodline garbage, that mixing genetics somehow defiles you.
His voice still carried those alien harmonics, each word making the medical equipment hum in sympathetic resonance.
It's not garbage to them. For 5,000 cycles, genetic purity has been our civilization's foundation. No mixing, no dilution, no contamination. The royal bloodline stays pure or the fleet stays sleeping. That's how we've maintained peace, by making sure no one could wake the weapons that nearly destroyed us.
And if the fleet never wakes up?
Then we die.
She pulled up a holographic star chart with trembling fingers, highlighting 17 sectors in angry red.
The Kresh Hegemony has been conquering our outer colonies for 2 decades. Systematic, patient, unstoppable. They don't fight fair wars. They arrive. They overwhelm our defenses through sheer numbers. They take what they want. Our defensive fleet can't match them. We've grown soft in our isolation, comfortable in our genetic purity, while they've built an empire through brutal efficiency.
Jake studied the tactical data with his enhanced perception, processing casualty figures and displacement statistics that made his stomach turn. Billions displaced, dozens of worlds burned, refugee camps that stretched across continents.
How many dead?
Conservative estimates, 47 million over 20 years. Most were civilians.
Lyra's voice cracked.
We've been losing a war we're too proud to admit we're fighting. But the war fleet, the ancient dreadnoughts our ancestors built before the Great Silence, those could end the war in weeks, maybe days. We know this. The Council knows this. But they won't wake them because it requires royal blood, and
royal blood stays pure, so millions die rather than let someone like me exist.
until now. I broke 5,000 years of law to save your life, Jake. But that wasn't why I did it. Not really.
Then why?
Because I watched my people die by the millions while the Council debated genetic purity. Because I realized that laws written by cowards to prevent another war had guaranteed we'd lose this one.
Her bioluminescence flashed angry red.
Because someone had to do something, and I was the only one with access to the forbidden rituals.
The memory of how they'd gotten here felt both distant and immediate. 4 days ago, Jake had been a simple mercenary with a straightforward contract: escort Princess Lyra to peace negotiations with the Kresh Hegemony. 15,000 credits, half up front, standard protection detail. He'd brought his best squad, 8 soldiers he'd trust with his life. The ambush had been perfectly coordinated. 3 plasma mortars hitting the convoy at a blind turn in the diplomatic corridor, turning armored transports into molten slag and screaming chaos. Jake's squad had died in the first 30 seconds. Only his paranoia, his habit of always keeping one eye on the princess regardless of other threats, had saved them. He'd pulled Lyra from her transport 3 seconds before it vaporized. They'd fled to an abandoned shrine, ancient architecture that the Kresh bombardment had somehow missed. But the death squads that pursued them wore Valkyrian armor, used Valkyrian tactics, spoke in Valkyrian military codes. Not the Kresh. An inside job. Someone wanted Lyra dead before she could make peace. Someone who benefited from continued war, from maintained genetic purity, from keeping the ancient fleet sleeping. Trapped and dying from plasma wounds that should have killed him instantly, Jake had made the choice. When Lyra offered her forbidden ritual, her emergency protocol that could save him but doom them both, he'd accepted without hesitation. Not because he wanted to live, mercenaries made peace with death early, but because she'd looked at him with those violet eyes and said, "Please, I can't do this alone." Now, enhanced senses let him feel every ship in the ancient fleet, like phantom limbs stretching across his consciousness. Bioluminescent markers, Lyra's genetic signature woven into his DNA, crawled across his skin like living constellations, mapping star charts and weapon frequencies directly into his nervous system. His tactical HUD displayed symbols he'd never learned but somehow understood, targeting solutions and fleet formations that felt more like muscle memory than conscious thought.
The Council wants us dead, but they can't act directly, not while you control the fleet. They're scared, Jake. Scared of you, scared of what you represent, scared that everything they believed was wrong.
So we're in a standoff.
For now, they've called a tribunal. 3 days from now, we face judgment before the High Council. They'll decide if we're traitors or saviors, abominations or evolution.
And if they decide wrong?
Lyra's expression hardened.
Then 87,000 dreadnoughts decide for them.
Crystalline judgment chambers hummed with accumulated power as Jake stood before the Valkyrian High Council 3 days later, every eye in the room tracking his movements like prey assessing a predator. Princess Lyra stood beside him, not in chains this time, but the threat hung in the air like ozone before a storm. 12 towering figures loomed from elevated platforms 30 meters high, their bioluminescent markings pulsing in synchronized judgment. Ancient beings whose lifespans measured in centuries, whose decisions shaped billions of lives. The chamber itself was meant to intimidate. Obsidian walls carved with 10,000 years of genetic purity laws. Ceiling displays showing the pristine bloodlines of every royal house. Atmospheric composition tuned to frequencies that made non-Valkyrian feel inherently uncomfortable. Jake felt it all, the pressure, the judgment, the weight of history pressing down, and pushed back with hybrid stubbornness that was entirely human.
Princess Lyra, daughter of the eternal sky, keeper of the seventh bloodline, you stand accused of bloodline contamination, genetic heresy, and treason against the sacred covenants established since the First Dynasty. These crimes carry mandatory execution by genetic dissolution. Speak your defense, or accept your judgment in silence.
Grand Counselor Vexthon intoned from his throne, his voice carrying harmonics that made the crystals vibrate. Lyra lifted her chin, and Jake felt pride surge through their hybrid connection.
I deny nothing. I would do it again. I would do it 1,000 times if it meant saving our people from extinction through pride.
Shocked gasps rippled through the chamber. Several counselors' bioluminescence flashed colors Jake had never seen, combinations that suggested emotions his human brain couldn't fully process. He felt Lyra's hand find his, their hybrid genetics resonating in sympathetic harmony that made monitoring equipment throughout the chamber spike with impossible readings.
You confess? Child, do you understand what you're saying? You've violated laws written by the first mothers themselves, laws that have preserved our species for millennia. You've created an abomination that threatens our very existence.
Another counselor leaned forward, her 6 eyes wide with disbelief.
I created survival. I created someone who could do what our precious genetic purity prevented. Someone who could wake the fleet we've let sleep while our people died by the millions. I understand you call it heresy. I call it evolution.
Her voice steady, despite the trembling Jake felt through their connection. Fleet Admiral Zethkar stepped forward from his position at the council's right hand, his ceremonial armor gleaming under the chamber's lights.
Honored Council, if I may speak to the practical implications.
He waited for Vexthon's grudging nod.
The hybrid has awakened 87,000 dreadnoughts. Already, our long-range sensors show them forming defensive perimeters around threatened systems. Ships that haven't moved in 3 millennia are now saving Valkyrian lives. Yesterday alone, hybrid-commanded vessels intercepted 4 Kresh raiding parties that would have reached colony worlds. 47 million civilians protected by the very abomination you're judging.
Because they obey an abomination. Ships that should only answer to pure royal blood now serve a hybrid mongrel, a human contaminated with stolen genetics. This is exactly what the First Mothers warned against.
Vexthon spat, his mandibles clicking with disgust.
No. Your ships don't care about genetic purity, Counselor. I can feel them, every single one. And you know what they care about? Their purpose, protection, defense, the mission they were built for 3,000 years ago. And right now, their mission is stopping an invasion. Your conventional fleet can't handle, and your genetic pride won't allow you to admit, is killing you.
His voice carrying harmonics that made every crystal in the chamber sing in resonance, a sound that climbed into frequencies that hurt Valkyrian hearing. The counselors flinched, and Jake felt a savage satisfaction. Silence crashed over the chamber like a physical force. Jake felt 87,000 ships pressing against his consciousness, waiting, hoping, eager. One command from him, and this entire chamber would cease to exist. The council, the guards, the judgment, all gone in a flash of weapons fire that could atomize continents. They knew it. He knew it. The question was whether he'd do it.
3 days. We grant you 3 days to prove your value, hybrid. Stop the Kresh offensive at the Outer Rim. Save our colonies. Demonstrate that Princess Lyra's heresy was necessary salvation rather than civilization-ending mistake.
Vexthon finally said, his bioluminescence cycling through colors that Jake's enhanced perception recognized as fear masked by authority. He leaned forward, his 6 eyes blazing.
Fail, and you both face execution by genetic dissolution, a death that will erase your contaminated bloodlines from existence. Succeed, and perhaps our laws were never as sacred as we believed. Perhaps the first mothers were wrong. Perhaps everything we've built our civilization upon was founded on fear rather than wisdom.
He paused, mandibles clicking slowly, as guards escorted them from the chamber, not in chains, but surrounded by enough firepower to level a city block. Lyra whispered,
3 days to save a civilization, no pressure.
Jake squeezed her hand, feeling their hybrid connection pulse with shared determination.
Princess, I've done harder jobs on less sleep and worse odds.
But they both knew he was lying. This was the fight of their lives, and failure meant more than just their deaths. It meant the end of everything they'd sacrificed for. Jake's fingers moved across the crystalline archive interface 48 hours before the deadline. His hybrid nervous system processing information at speeds that would liquefy a human brain. Terabytes of data flowing through neural pathways that shouldn't exist, painting pictures in his mind of civilizations long dead and secrets deliberately buried. Lyra had given him access codes to the deepest vaults, the hidden archives where the council kept records too dangerous for public knowledge. What he found made his hybrid blood run cold.
Lyra, you need to see this, right now.
He called, his voice tight with barely contained horror. She appeared beside him within seconds, her royal guards trailing at a respectful distance.
What did you find?
He pulled up a holographic display showing star charts that predated modern galactic civilization, migration routes connecting Earth, and dozens of Velcuran worlds in patterns that couldn't be natural.
Your genetic fusion didn't just unlock the fleet. It unlocked your entire hidden history. The archive recognized my hybrid signature and dumped everything. Every secret your council has been hiding for 50,000 years.
Lyra studied the ancient glyphs flowing across the display, her bioluminescence flickering through confused patterns.
That's old Velcuran, pre-scattering dialect. I can barely read it. Where did...
Watch.
Jake scrolled through experiment logs, genetic analyses, breeding programs, detailed with scientific precision that left no room for interpretation.
Project Genesis, engineering humans as a backup population in case the Velcuran homeworld fell to the enemy, making us compatible with your technology, your biology, your fleet systems at a cellular level. Look at this DNA comparison.
He pulled up a side-by-side analysis that made Lyra gasp. Human and Velcuran genomes, 97% compatible in ways that couldn't be evolutionary convergence. Designed compatibility, engineered kinship.
Humanity isn't an accident, Lyra. We're not some primitive species that coincidentally shares your body plan and respiratory chemistry. We're a contingency plan, your people's backup in case the homeworld fell. They seeded Earth with Velcuran genetic templates 50,000 years ago, modified for the local environment, engineered to evolve into something that could one day reunite with the parent species.
Then the great scattering, the disaster that supposedly separated our people from the ancient homeworld.
She stared at the data, her worldview crumbling with each revelation.
Was deliberate, strategic genetic diaspora.
Jake pulled up more files, his enhanced perception processing terabytes of information simultaneously.
Your ancestors scattered humanity, or proto-humanity, across the galaxy and wiped the records, hoping we'd evolve independently but remain genetically compatible. Every war between our species, every conflict, we were fighting our own cousins across 50,000 years of separation, and neither side ever knew it.
That's why the hybrid fusion worked. Why you can command the fleet, why our genetics merged so easily. You're not contaminating our bloodline, Jake. You're completing it. You're the missing half we engineered ourselves to need.
Lyra whispered, her fingers trembling against the console.
Look at this.
He pulled up a file marked with security protocols that should have been impossible to breach.
The war fleet wasn't built by pure Valkyran. The ancient schematics show hybrid crews. Your people and proto-humans working together, combining Valkyran technology with human adaptability. The first mothers didn't establish genetic purity to preserve your species. They established it to make you forget what you'd lost, to prevent you from remembering why you'd scattered in the first place.
Admiral Zethkar's voice cut through their revelation, his hologram materializing with emergency override codes.
Is this transmission secure?
It is now,
Jake said, routing the communication through encryption protocols he'd inherited through genetic memory.
Admiral, you need to hear this. Every assumption your civilization is built on, it's a lie designed to protect you from the truth.
He played the archive recordings. Valkyran scientists 50,000 years ago, debating Project Genesis in voices tight with fear, discussing how to save their civilization from an enemy they couldn't fight directly. The recordings were fragmentary, corrupted by time, but enough remained to paint a nightmare picture. Zethkar listened in silence, his bioluminescence cycling through colors that betrayed his growing horror. When the recordings ended, his mandibles clicked slowly, processing patterns that Jake had learned to recognize as deep thought.
So our genetic purity laws, our isolation, our entire civilization's foundation,
built on a lie to keep you from remembering what you were running from. Your ancestors chose amnesia over truth, genetic purity over hybrid strength, because they believed separation was the only way to survive.
And what were we running from?
The Admiral asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. Jake pulled up the final file, heavily corrupted, partially deleted, but enough remained to paint a picture of existential terror.
Something called the Harvesters. An enemy so powerful your ancestors chose genetic diaspora and collective amnesia over fighting them directly. They're machine-organic hybrids, not like me, but something else. Something that consumes entire civilizations and converts their biomass into more of itself.
The file showed images that made Jake's hybrid biology recoil. Creatures that were part starship, part biological nightmare, organisms the size of planets that fed on sentient species. The ancient Valkyran hadn't been cowards. They'd been survivors, scattering their genetics across the galaxy in hopes that someday, somehow, their descendants might be strong enough to fight what they couldn't. Lyra's hand found Jake's, their hybrid genetics resonating with shared understanding.
And if they come back?
Then maybe that's exactly why your ancestors made sure humans and Valkyran could reunite. Maybe we're not an accident or a mistake. Maybe we're the weapon they built to face what they couldn't. Hybrid strength combining Valkyran technology with human adaptability and sheer stubborn refusal to quit.
Feeling 87,000 ships pulse in his consciousness like waking giants. The three of them stood in silence, staring at ancient warnings and prehistoric nightmares, realizing the Kresh Hegemony might be the least of their problems. Somewhere in the dark between galaxies, the Harvesters might still be waiting. And the hybrid experiment that had just begun might be the only thing standing between extinction and survival.
We need to win this war first. Stop the Kresh, prove the hybrid concept works. Then,
Zethkar said finally, his voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. He paused, looking at the images of the harvesters with barely concealed dread.
Then we prepare for what's coming.
The Kresh Hegemony fleet emerged from hyperspace like a metal tsunami, reality rippling with spatial distortions as 300 dreadnoughts translated from faster-than-light travel into normal space. Each ship was a monument to military efficiency. 5 kilometers of weapons platforms and armor, crews numbering in the tens of thousands, built for one purpose: overwhelming force. Their weapons were already charging for the killing blow. Capacitors winding up to full power as targeting computers painted 3 Valkyrian colony worlds with death markers. 3 billion Valkyrian civilians waited on the planets below, trapped between evacuation failures and incoming annihilation. The civilian transports couldn't evacuate everyone in time. Simple mathematics of ship capacity versus population meant that 2 billion would die in the first strike. The remaining billion might survive long enough to be enslaved. Jake stood on the command deck of the ancient flagship Eternal Judgment. His consciousness stretched across light years like neural tissue extended to its breaking point. The sensation was agony and transcendence combined, his human brain screaming that this was impossible while his Valkyrian neural pathways sang with purpose. Sweat poured down his face despite the temperature-controlled environment, his hybrid nervous system burning like acid as he processed tactical data that would overwhelm 1,000 human admirals. Around him, the bridge crew worked in stunned silence. They'd seen the manifest, 87,000 dreadnoughts under hybrid command, each ship 10 times larger than the Kresh vessels, each carrying weapons that shouldn't exist in civilized space. But they hadn't seen them fight, hadn't watched their hybrid admiral coordinate forces across impossible distances, hadn't witnessed what happened when human tactics merged with Valkyrian technology.
Admiral Zethkar, pull your conventional fleet back to defensive perimeter Delta. You're just targets out here, and I need you protecting the evacuation shuttles.
Jake said through the command channel, his voice carrying harmonics that made communication crystals resonate.
Like hell I will. Those are my colonies, my people. I'm not retreating while civilians die.
Zethkar snarled from his flagship 3 million kilometers away.
Admiral, this is my fleet, my command, my responsibility. Trust me, or watch your ships die alongside everyone else when the Kresh open fire. You have 60 seconds to comply.
Jake's voice carried steel that made Zethkar pause. A heartbeat of silence stretched across the void. Jake felt Zethkar's military pride warring with tactical reality, felt the moment the older warrior made his choice.
All conventional forces withdraw to defensive perimeter Delta. The hybrid has command. Show us what your heresy can do, Fleet Lord.
Zethkar's voice carried resignation and hope in equal measure. Jake's consciousness exploded outward like a detonating star, touching each of his 87,000 vessels simultaneously. The sensation was beyond agony, like having 87,000 bodies, all moving in perfect coordination, all thinking with fragments of his mind. Human battle doctrine merged with Valkyrian tactical wisdom, creating strategies that had never existed before. Formations that bent space itself, weapon patterns that violated causality, coordination that approached quantum entanglement. He felt every ship as an extension of himself, the carriers holding position in high orbit, the destroyers forming perimeter screens, the assault cruisers preparing for close engagement, the siege platforms charging weapons that could crack moons. Each vessel's crew, mostly ancient automation systems, but some with skeleton crews of hybrid volunteers, moved in perfect synchronization with his will.
Kresh Fleet, you have 10 seconds to retreat. This is your only warning. Jump to hyperspace now, or learn what happens when you threaten my people.
He transmitted on all frequencies, his voice carrying through subspace and normal space simultaneously. 3 days after the Battle of Outer Rim, Jake stood before the High Council once more. But this time, the atmosphere had shifted like weather before a storm breaking. The crystalline judgment chambers no longer hummed with hostile power. Instead, uncertainty filled the air like ozone. 12 ancient counselors struggling with the weight of paradigm shift. Lyra stood beside him, freely, her hand in his, as they faced the 12 who'd sentenced them to prove their worth or die. Jake's body still ached from neural burn, but his hybrid healing had accelerated recovery beyond anything human medicine could achieve. Scars on his brain where synapses had burned out were already rerouting, growing new connections that made him stronger than before.
The Kresh Hegemony has sued for peace. They've withdrawn from all contested territories and offered reparations for 20 years of conquest. Our colonies are safe. Our people are celebrating in streets across 17 systems.
Grand Counselor Vexthon announced, his voice carrying none of its former venom. The bioluminescent patterns on his face cycled through colors that Jake's enhanced perception recognized as humility mixed with lingering pride. He paused, mandibles clicking slowly.
Because of you, Fleet Lord Jake Morales.
The title hung in the air, Fleet Lord. Not hybrid, not abomination. A rank that placed Jake above even Grand Admirals, answering only to the Council itself. Jake said nothing. Let them come to terms with their new reality. Let them process what it meant that their salvation had come from the very heresy they'd condemned.
The genetic purity laws have been suspended, pending comprehensive review by theological scholars and geneticists. If hybrids can command our fleet, can save our people, can coordinate military operations that pure bloods cannot,
another counselor said, her voice carrying weight of centuries dissolving. She trailed off, the implication hanging heavy.
then perhaps our understanding of sacred bloodlines requires fundamental revision.
More than revision, complete abolition. The ancient archives prove our ancestors intended humans and Valkyran to reunite, that we were always meant to be one species. Genetic purity wasn't sacred. It was a mistake born from fear and incomplete memory.
Lyra said firmly, her voice carrying royal authority that Jake felt resonate through their connection. Murmurs rippled through the chamber like wind through crystalline chimes. Jake felt the weight of history shifting, felt an entire civilization's worldview cracking apart under the pressure of undeniable truth.
There are complications. Already, young Valkyran are requesting genetic fusion procedures. They want to become hybrids, to command ships, to share your power. Hundreds have applied. Thousands more inquire daily. We cannot control this flood.
Vexthon admitted, his bioluminescence flickering with concern that seemed genuine, rather than political.
Good. Maybe your people need to stop being so damn scared of change. Maybe they need to remember that evolution isn't contamination, it's survival.
Jake said simply, his voice carrying harmonics that made every council member flinch.
And maybe we need to prepare for what comes next. The ancient archives mention the harvesters, the enemy our ancestors fled from 50,000 years ago. If they return, we'll need more than one hybrid to face them. We'll need an entire generation of warriors who combine our technology with human adaptability.
Zethkar added, stepping forward from his position at the council's right hand. Silence fell over the chamber like a shroud, heavy with implications that everyone understood, but nobody wanted to voice. The harvesters weren't theoretical anymore. They were archived nightmares that might still be waiting, and the hybrid experiment that had just saved the Valkyrian might be their only hope for surviving what came next.
High Command has voted. Admiral Zethkar, you are hereby promoted to Grand Admiral, commanding all conventional forces across Valkyrian space. Jake Morales, you are granted the rank of Fleet Lord, Supreme Commander of the Ancient Armada, with authority superseding all military ranks save this council itself. Princess Lyra will serve as liaison between human and Valkyrian populations, coordinator of hybrid integration programs, and keeper of ancient archives.
Vexthon said finally, his voice carrying formal authority that couldn't quite mask the fear beneath.
Fleet Lord, that mean I outrank everyone outside this room?
Jake repeated, tasting the title.
It means that you're responsible for defending this civilization. Both species, all colonies, every life within our borders. It means you command the most powerful fleet in known space.
Zethkar said, with something almost like a smile, mandibles clicking in patterns that suggested approval. His expression hardened, bioluminescence shifting to military steel.
And if the Harvesters return, you'll be our first and last line of defense. Humanity's stubbornness and our technology, that's our only hope.
Jake looked at Lyra, at his transformed hands still scarred from neural burn, at the impossible path stretching ahead. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a simple mercenary, taking a protection contract worth 15,000 credits. Now he commanded 87,000 godships and bore responsibility for billions of lives across 2 species.
Well, at least the pay's better than my last job. You are paying me, right?
He said finally, a grin cracking his scarred face. Despite everything, the war, the transformation, the weight of history, Lyra laughed. The sound echoed through the judgment chamber like music, breaking tension that had built over thousands of years. Somewhere in that laughter, Jake heard hope for their future, hybrid, complicated, and utterly unprecedented. The meeting adjourned. The war was over. But as Jake and Lyra left the chamber, walking through corridors lined with staring Valkyrian, whose bioluminescence flickered with fear and hope and curiosity, both felt the weight of the real battle ahead, building a civilization that honored both species, preparing for ancient enemies, and proving that hybrid existence wasn't abomination. It was humanity's greatest gift and Valkyrian salvation wrapped in impossible genetics.